chosen as a topic for today, the first, wealth is health. And that was said by Ralph Waldo Emerson. As I read a little bit about Ralph Waldo Emerson, one of the most interesting things that I learned about the man is the reason that you see all three names there is because he actually went by his middle name, Waldo. So Waldo Emerson loved nature. He was a great American poet, author. He wrote a lot about it. I'm sure he enjoyed many days on the sunny beaches. Can you find Waldo Emerson in this picture? Good for you. I made it actually pretty easy. But in all seriousness, Ralph Waldo Emerson was very wise in his conception that the true foundation of wealth is health. And in defining these terms, my favorite definition for wealth is an abundance of valuable possessions. Could be anything that's valuable. And of course, the definition of health, and I love this definition, the particular state of complete physical, mental, social, and spiritual well-being. You know, we're usually pretty good about that physical component. And we're okay on the mental component, but sometimes I don't think we pay enough attention to that social and spiritual aspect. As I looked up definitions of wealth and health, I came across this guy. His name is James Clear, and he wrote a book called Atomic Habits, which I did not read. So I really know nothing about the points that he made, but his definition of wealth was that it had four components. It had a financial component, of course we think of that as money. He thought of the social component as status, the time component is freedom, and he thought of physical wealth as health. I don't know if he put those in any particular order, but I think when we're young, we have a tendency to sacrifice our physical wealth and our time, and a lot of times our friends and family and each other to attain more of this top one. So in a very worldly way, this is the order that most people put them in. But if you get back to more of a Ralph Waldo order, he put physical health at the top as a foundation for everything, knowing that would give you more time, or at least more quality with the time that you had. When I was young, my dad used to tell me that there's worse things than dying. At the time, I couldn't really imagine any, but with time, we've all seen that. And with that time well spent, we have plenty of community and family and friends. And finally, we have enough money to take care of our needs. So, how wealthy are we? How do we feel? And are we free to use our time to pursue what's most important? Do we have a strong community and friends and family? Do we have enough money to take care of our needs? Funny enough, we can ask these same questions of our land and our farms. What is the state of its ecological health? Because that's really what drives productivity and sustainability ultimately. How much time does our production system have left? You know, Chris said that we were going to step on some toes, and I might as well just put a foot on mine because, you know, I'm an irrigated farmer, and we don't know how much time we have left. But when we look at our systems, and each person in this room considers her system, does it have 100 years left? Or 50? Or 25? Or 10? I don't know the answer to those questions. But the ecological state of the land will determine how much time we have left. And what impact does that system have on our communities? You all remember the days that the air and the sky is brown. And how much productivity does that system produce or generate? Or how much money does it take to keep it going? These are some things that we're going to look at today. So I'm going to kind of depart a little bit right here And as you know, I'm a farmer. And we tend to view things within the context of our lifetime and our own experience. And a lot of the way that I view the paradigm that I believe that we're in, this linear consumption model, I view it through the eyes and the lens of that experience. I've known 2 generations before me, my granddad, my dad, getting to know the generation behind me. And in that 85 years, we have developed a certain system. And before we were here, it's all we know, right? And it's very much this linear consumption model. But before we were here, God had a system on the plains. And there were millions of buffalo. And the sun would shine, the rain would come, and the buffalo would walk around and eat the grass. And that system thrived for thousands of years. And it didn't need any management to thrive or to continue. It just was. But the system that we've built over the last 70 or 80 years is not like that system. And it doesn't have those perpetual aspects, and it's very much built on this idea of linear consumption. And so I take things, I've always thought, especially when I was younger, over the course of my career, it's mostly been about monopolizing assets, monopolizing wealth, if you will, taking my time, my energy, my health, some seeds, some fertilizer, some water, and putting all these things together to come up with something else that we perceive as valuable. But I don't think that we value resources correctly, because when we think of the water or a tree, and we look at a tree and the value of lumber, we don't think about the time that it took, or the sun and water that God poured into that tree to make it in all of its treeness. We value lumber based on what we perceive as its scarcity. And we likely don't put value on things until they become scarce. And in that sense, we are very linear in our thinking on consumption and monetization of resources. And sadly, a lot of times we carry that linear consuming mindset even into the way that we view each other. And we all do it because we live in this world where we say the economy is driven on consumerism and consumption of resources and this and that. But I don't think that that's the way that it was meant to be on the 6th day when God made a gardener. And I don't think that our farming systems resemble that. And, we're coming to a time over the last 8 years as farmers, we're kind of a protected class. And we get a lot of help and assistance from the government, crop insurance. In the last 8 years, we've had more assistance than in the first 16 that I farmed. And, there's just been a lot of money coming in the form of disaster payments and COVID assistance and all these things. And we're going to look at that some a little later. But this year, 2024, is over, and we're into 25, and we all know where we're at and where inflation is and how hard it is to make ends meet. But farmers, from what I can gather, are in as bad a shape after that 8 years of heavy support as they've ever been in 24. Well, how is that possible? I mean, how can we go through this time where we've received the most assistance that we ever have, yet, it hasn't been enough? Well, it's because our system is broken. And, I, as much as anyone else, am very much part of that broken system. And it's not only agriculture, but it's our food system, it's the way that we grow food, it's our medical industry, and that's what we're really here to talk about today. But we need to realize the innate value of all things, of the tree, of the water, of each other. And I know that's hard sometimes because, when we're born, we're fairly useless, right? For many years. I remember when our babies were born, Lindy was very disappointed in me because, I'm a pretty sensitive, loving guy, but I didn't know what to do with a baby. And they're very small and delicate, and if it hadn't been for her, they probably would have died. But anyway, they grow and they become more useful. And then they finally grow to the point where they can hoe and they can drive a tractor. And you can just squeeze all the time and productivity, out of their time and their sweat and their effort. And then once there can be no more effort extracted, and they're old, and then we're kind of back where we started, right? And that's how we view sometimes each other, and that's how we view our land sometimes. And that's where we're going with that. Before I get there, I said earlier that, when we're young, we're willing to give all of our time and our health and our effort, even at the expense of our health, in order, especially on the farm, to get where we quote unquote want to be. And that's pretty much what I've done over the last 20 years. I'm 47 years old, and, as I had a wreck when I was younger, like 10, laid me up pretty good. And I always attributed a lot of the problems that I ended up experiencing later in life, due to that event, which I don't really think that anymore. But, by the time I got in my 30s and stuff, I was feeling lots of pain, inflammation, in my back, in my feet, everywhere. And by the time I got to be 38, I couldn't wear boots anymore because my feet hurt so bad I couldn't stand still anyway. And so I started wearing Rockports because they're very fashionable and comfortable. It's kind of perfect anyway. But anyway, then it got to the point where they quit making my Rockports that I liked. And so I kind of graduated to On Cloud. But then as I got into my 40s, I'd always been able to kind of maintain my weight and this and that. And after about 42, I'd always bounce between 180 and 200 pounds, and everything that I did, just didn't work anymore, and so I just broke that 200. And by the time I was 44, I just went up to about 220. And anyway, by this time, my elbows are hurting, my shoulders are hurting, and I was told that maybe I could go get some shots in them, and that would be, I never did, but they were hurting bad enough and constantly to the point that, I was losing strength and everything else. And by this time, I've been on acid reducers since I was in high school. I was taking medicine to slow my heart down. I was taking medicine for my blood pressure. I was taking, statins for cholesterol and feeling awful. And looking at my dad, who at the time was 77, and, healthy enough, but certainly not the paragon of health. But I'm thinking, I'm not going to make it. I mean, there is no way. The way I feel right now, I'm not going to make it. And so my brother-in-law, got me excited about changing my diet. And I did, And I was amazed that within 14 days after I cut out all the sugar and this and that, and I'll just tell you, I kind of reset my relationship with food with like a carnivore diet. I don't think that's where people need to end up, but I don't think it's a bad place to start because it showed me how good I could feel based off of what I ate. And I've heard my whole life, you are what you eat. But I never realized how intimate that connection was. And after 10 days, I didn't take any acid reducers. And then, after 14 days, my elbows and shoulders and feet stopped hurting and just continually got better and better and better. And I was thankful to be proven, how good I could feel. But that's kind of the thought behind this conference. We have more control over these things, the health of the ecology, our health, than what we think we do. Getting back to these ideas, and these numbers are going to be very boring, okay? And there's just not a whole lot I can do to dress it up, except go through them fast. But crop insurance is complicated, and government payments are very complicated. The farmers in here are going to understand a lot of the code speak that I'll likely employ. But I thought it would be interesting, since I talked about how much government assistance that we had received over the last 8 years, if I just added up my own as a percentage of row crop revenue. Now, we graze some cattle and we, do some custom work and this and that, and that's not a part of any of this, but this is just all crop sales, gross crop sales over the last 8 years for Harmony Farms, and it's all government payments and crop insurance revenue. And as you can see, about 75% of our total crop row revenues is coming from actual crop sales, and the other 16% is coming from government payments, 9% net crop insurance. When you look at the government payments, it's confusing because some of these payments, 46%, come in the form of economic assistance, 22% counter-cyclical price support, 27% disaster payments, and 5%, in my case, conservation payments. And these government payments account for 16% of total row crop revenues over the last 8 years. So the 22% that's counter-cyclical price support, that would be like ARC payments, PLC payments. So for those of you who don't know, they're counter-cyclical. When the price of the commodities you're growing gets low, then they trigger as a price support. When it comes back up, they go away. And so 22% from there. And that's also 3.5% of total revenue, row crop. Conservation payments for the first couple of years had the CSP program. And so that's where that came from, less than 1% total row crop revenue. Economic assistance, this has been the big one, okay? I don't know if y'all remember the market facilitation payments, the ginning assistance, the coronavirus stuff, some of the ERP, but this has been nearly half of what's come, even more than disaster. In my case, at least. 27% come from disaster payments, and these are disasters, hailstorms, lack of production, drought, whatever. Of the net crop insurance revenue, which you remember is 9% of the total, 3% of it comes from what's called group risk policy. So it has nothing to do with losses on my farm, but if people don't do well in the county, regardless of how you do, it triggers a payment. And so that's been a big part of the crop insurance revenues. And then the other 70% comes from multi-peril, crop hail, revenue protection, which is another way when the price gets lower. See if I can move that away a little bit. When the price gets lower, it triggers, and it's been 6%. So if you look at it, if you take out the group risk policies and the things that are triggered off of disasters on our own farm, then 87% has come from crop sales. And then the other 13% has come from a combination of crop insurance and disaster payments. That doesn't look so bad. But you have to consider that these premiums are highly subsidized by the government, okay? And so when we pay our crop insurance premiums, it's usually somewhere around 60-40, a little higher in cases. I put my crop hail premiums in here because this will make sense to some of you. On certain things, we would use enterprise units and then maybe try to individualize the coverage with crop hail because it was less expensive than buying, the multi-peril. Although crop hail's not subsidized at all, and so that makes my percent subsidy lower than what most would be. But I don't really know how to go for that. But in any event, the government's paid more of the premiums than I have. And of all the money that's been paid in by myself or on my behalf, we've gotten back 98% of that money in indemnities. So, they're still a little ahead, but, not by much. When you think about it in that sense, then even though 9% comes from crop insurance and 16%, is coming in all these other things, it's really all coming from the government. Because if you consider what premiums they pay, and crop insurance being a wash, it's taken just nearly a quarter of it. And, you think about the last 8 years and what percent of the net money does that represent? Probably 100% of it, And this is about as good as it can look, not because I'm a great farmer or better than anybody else, but, we've done some things over the last several years. Number one, our numbers are a little bit better because of irrigation, okay? If we were all dry land, our numbers, it would be far more of the pie would be coming from the disasters and the crop insurance and this and that. And then also, we've tinkered with a lot of wide row cotton. And, when you plant 60-inch cotton instead of 30-inch cotton, it only counts 2/3 of the acres. So you're leaving 1/3 of any kind of group policy on the table. You're leaving 1/3 of your coverage on the table. So that all these things make our losses, tend to be lower. But there are places where this pie would be completely inverted, to where over the last 8 years, only 25% of it's coming from crop sales and the other 75% from the government. Just to let you know, like our effective rates, they rate you based on how you do. And our effective rate on a 60% multi-peril policy with all the bells and whistles is it was 6.7% for 24. And that's pretty low. They can get as high as 25%. And so the worst APH I've ever seen was 180 pounds on an irrigated farm in Floyd County, and it was cupped. Even though the actual 10-year average production was 181 pounds, it was cupped at 60% of T, which, would guarantee him $180 at 80-cent cotton, of coverage. But it was going to cost him $45 to get it. And it was all the way down to where there's just $135 there. And so even if you get in this insurance trap and disaster and this and that, it's very much a downward spiral, and it's very much that linear model of consumption, and it's very much, the two mice in the middle of the snake's belly, wondering where they are. There's only one way out. So how wealthy is our land? And how much time does our production system have left? And what is that impact on the community, and what does it continue to be? And finally, how productive is it? Or how much money is it going to take to keep it going? And if we go forward another 5 years, 10 years, and we don't make any changes, are we going to need more money to prop that system up or less? And it's all going to be driven by the direction that we go with our ecology. I think it would be wise to consider just for a moment the relationship between healing and health. Healing is to make whole. And this here in the orange is the etymology of our word for health. It comes from an old English word that I'm not even going to try to pronounce because I don't speak Old English. I barely speak New English. But I love this definition. It's the definition of the word that it came from is wholeness or being whole or sound or well. So healing is intricately related to our health and to the health of our land. Because without healing, we're going to continue to break and be broken. But with healing, we can be made whole. And I hope that during the course of this conference, we can really concentrate on our ability to heal and the ability of the land to heal. Which means the only question for us is do we want to be made whole? So one of my favorite stories in the Bible is in the 5th chapter of John. And it's the healing at the pool of Bethesda where, an angel would ever so often trouble the waters, and then the first person to go in would be healed of this. And there were a lot of sick people that would lay there and hang out there. And Jesus came on a guy that had been laying in an infirm condition for 38 years, I think. And he asked him, "Do you want to be made whole?" And the guy immediately started making excuses and saying, "Well, every time I try to go in, somebody cuts me off. I don't have anybody to help me do it." And anyway, Jesus just put the ball in his hands and he said, "Well, if you want to be made whole, get up and walk." And then he told him to carry his bed, which of course he later got in trouble with for carrying it on the Sabbath. Everybody knows that's a big no-no back then. And they asked him and of course, it wasn't his fault that time either. He's like, well, this guy that healed me, he told me to pick up my bed and carry it. So I thought I'd better do that. And they said, "Well, who was it?" "I don't know, Well, a little bit later, Jesus caught up with him. And what he told the guy was so interesting. He said, go on and don't sin anymore, or an even worse fate is going to befall you. And I don't know what that worse fate is. But I think that perhaps that worse fate is the prison of self-pity. Do we want to lie in that, or do we want to be made whole? Do we want our communities to be made whole? Do we want our land to be made whole? Ultimately, just as Jesus put that in that man's hands, that decision is largely in all hands. And we know that all things are in His hands. And that He has the power to heal this land. As I've gotten a little older, a lot, it's amazing how the time's passed. But that's my wife, Lindy. And I met her on October 28th, 2005. And this picture was taken not too long after that. And I know she'll never forget that day either, because that's the day that this gal up here really hit the jackpot. And I hit the jackpot too. And she had Tucker. And this is, you know, that's a picture of me and Tucker at Disney World. Lindy didn't get to go to Disney World because Lindy was looking more like this. She was about nearly 8 months pregnant at the time, so we just left her at home. And a little bit later, we had Alice. Y'all didn't believe me about hitting the jackpot, but look at that smile. And, you know, that was within a week of our first anniversary. Best gift ever. And anyway, my dad told me on that day that she wouldn't stay that small very long. And she's now nearly 18. And she'll be getting out of high school pretty soon. Then we had this guy, and he didn't stay very small very long either. This picture is a little bit older. Not that he couldn't still pick me up, but I recycled it for a very specific reason. And that reason being that he's fixing to either have more of a handful or less of a handful, because he got married last spring, and this summer he's going to have a daughter. And so that is why health and the health of family and the health of community becomes more and more important to us over time. And Lord willing, you know, we'll have plenty of time to enjoy this little one. But once again, I thank you for your presence, your attendance, your attention. And I think that we're all really going to be able to learn a lot here that's really going to help us. Thank you.